In its 50th year and after 5 federal election defeats, the Liberal Party of Australia held a leadership ballot.
We have a new leader. The Liberal Party is Alexander Downer. In the case of the deputy leader...
Yes, Sir Henderson.
Youth generation has taken over. John Hewson has lost this day. Mr. Fraser, in Melbourne, this was your prediction and it's come right.
Well, I'm delighted. I think
it's a clear decision that has been made, and I think the important thing is that now the decision is made, we go on and put all our efforts into winning that next election.
I am born of the Liberal Party. I am a creature of the Liberal Party, and the Liberal Party has always been a common-sense, practical political party. Its institutions...
Alexander Downer is the 4th leader in 5 years. His 3 predecessors lost the job because they failed with the voters.
I didn't convince enough of them in March 1993 to vote for us, but we came very, very close.
Under my leadership, we will win government and get on with the task of nation building.
Well, we start off by trying to win. Yes.
Where do we go from there?
Well, let's win first.
For its first 20 years, the party had just one leader. Liberal leaders carry great expectations, for ultimately they're all measured against the victories of that one man. Party founder, Sir Robert Menzies.
Friends, I have tonight accepted nomination to stand for Parliament in the Coringal by-election.
Are you going to let him get away with that?
Although I should welcome a fight, my committee assures me that my return will be unopposed.
Right. I'm just a plain farmer. The only society I ever mix with is the Cooperative Society. But Mr. Webster's going to find that it's one thing to stand for Parliament and another thing to sit in it. His committee tell him he will be returned unopposed. That's wrong. I'm going to oppose it.
In 1940, film comedy Dad Rudd MP championed the little bloke fighting the politics of vested interest. At the time, Conservative politics in Australia were losing support. The forerunner of the Liberal Party was the United Australia Party, the 5th separate Conservative party to hold government since Federation. Now, as Australians marched to war, the UAP was falling apart.
Oddly enough, the Liberal Party now reminds me very, very much of the old United Australia Party that the Liberal Party superseded in 44, because that was, we seem to have got, after 50 years, into exactly the same situation.
The UAP was a peculiar mixture, and they didn't represent the people as such, and they were controlled by what was then known as National Union. And National Union was a very tight group of businessmen.
My father would say things to me as a child like, never listen to the advice of business people. They're not wise people. They're people who are self-serving. I think my father's views on business very much reflected Menzies' views as well. He, I think, learnt from the experience of the United Australia Party, which simply grew so close to business that it became really the UAP became the political wing of the business community.
If the UAP did not meet the popular mood, nor was its leader, Robert Gordon Menzies, a man of the people.
He didn't suffer fools gladly then, and I think was liable to be a bit abrupt and cut people off without really giving consideration to their feelings.
He had this wonderful wit, but it was a hurtful wit. And he had to learn to use his wit without being hurtful, and it was a very difficult thing for him to do.
remember once as a very young boy, Menzies would use the government members' room to put on his 8mm movies that he took when he made trips to England. And I can remember all the remarks made around the room as Menzies was sort of upstaging everybody with these movies, and he was a bit of an upstart in those days. He had an air of arrogance about him.
In 1941, Menzies returned as Prime Minister from wartime London. UAP colleagues greeted him, but in reality, the party was tearing itself to pieces.
I come back to Australia with just one sick feeling in my heart, and that is that I must now come back to my own country and play politics. I think that it's a diabolical thing that anybody should...
Menzies was deposed from the leadership. The UAP splintered and lost government to John Curtin's Labour Party.
He then was the first Prime Minister in wartime to be dismissed or forced to resign by his own party. And we treated him as a bit of a joke.
I was too young to be aware of it, except that feeling of gloom in the household and almost misery, I suppose. The fact that his own people had turned against him, I think he found very hard.
Since the government's announcement that clothing rationing was contemplated...
By 1943, Australia was enduring the sacrifices of wartime.
Extraordinary scenes of panic buying. Scores acted like panicky Latins. For instance, the woman of 60 who bought 17 evening dresses of a type she herself could never wear, possibly with a little black market trading in view.
In the 43 election, the UAP provided neither vision nor hope. The Conservatives were trounced by the Curtin Labour government.
The old UAP was finished, that was washed up. The election had been lost. The party, very much like it is now, didn't seem to have any nerve of policy.
Despairing of the UAP, Menzies had already set about reinventing non-Labour politics. In 1942, he gave a series of radio broadcasts defining his political constituency.
The kind of people I myself represent in Parliament, salary earners, shopkeepers, skilled artisans, professional men and women, farmers, and so on. These are, in the political and economic sense, the middle class. They are, for the most part, unorganized and unself-conscious.
Identifying a constituency was one thing, creating policy was another. For economic theory, Menzies drew on a private institute run by political advisor Charles Kemp.
The vital thing was to restore people's faith in a private enterprise economy. Many in the business community were advocating a return to laissez-faire policies, but these were not credible to most people in the community. The new party had to both, on the one hand, support a private enterprise economy based on individual effort and achievement, but also concede that government had a key role.
The first Liberal Unity Conference was in October 1944, when 18 Conservative groups came to Canberra. Then, in December, delegates arrived by train at Albury on the New South Wales border to thrash out a new party. The Liberals would be a federation of state parties, structured to accommodate both national unity and state rivalries.
Mr Menzies thought it was far better to have the conference in a small country town where the finger couldn't be pointed one way or the other. I mean, there was always a bit of an ill feeling between New South Wales and Victoria. I suppose there still is.
The Liberal Party would aim for mass membership to escape the reliance on business. The largest and wealthiest foundation group was the Australian Women's National League, which already had 40,000 members.
The Australian Women's National League women had some money. And a lot of the big financial people were still supporting the UAP and were not convinced that Menzies could form a new party because he called it the Liberal Party, which of course was more liberal than the Conservative Party. And my understanding is that those women only agreed to support him, Menzies, in the formation of the new party as long as the women were voted in and got equal representation in the organisation.
I set off to form form branches throughout the state, really, and quite a number of them. I don't say I formed every branch in Tasmania, but I thought, well, now what do you do? I then worked out a plan for myself, and that was that I would go to a little country area, ring up a friend I knew, perhaps at Hewson or Sorel or Buckland, and ask her, would she invite a few of her friends along to have a cup of coffee with me, that I was hoping to form a branch of the Liberal Party.
My home is where my wife and children are. The instinct to be with them is the instinct of civilized man. The instinct to give them a chance in life is a noble instinct, not to make them leaners, but lifters.
If he could get the women to understand what he was talking about, he would get their vote. I think a lot of women voted for him and when their husbands voted Labor.
The women's section was part of what was described as the Liberal machine. Well, really, the Liberal machine were people like my mum and my grandmother, who when Mr. Balty, as he then was, or Mr. Menzies, as he then was, called an election, they would just go over to their cupboards, pull out the books from the previous election, go to the respective hospitals and the people they'd done postal votes, and before the Labor Party could get going, all these women had covered the constituencies with the postal vote applications. It's very difficult to do that now. I mean, Australian society is very different.
Within 5 years, membership was 155,000, with more women than men. Yet, like their Conservative forebears, the Liberals recruited from Protestant Australia.
The group representing the UAP, at that time of which I was a member, a check was made of every individual in that group. And I was found to be the only Catholic in the group. And there was a bitter fight to stop me from becoming finally on the executive of the new Liberal Party.
The question of whether it was difficult for Catholics and other outsiders to be in the Liberal Party presumes that there would have been very many who would have wanted to belong to it. I don't think that's right at all. I think that there was a general consensus. I think that the people who were the Liberal Party wouldn't have wanted them, and I think that belonging to a totally different social group, basically working class people of largely before the war and Irish antecedents, they simply wouldn't have wanted to be in the same political organisation.
A Catholic was opposed, wherever possible. It was a bitter battle in many cases. Menzies, I must say to his credit, saw that this was not going to lead us anywhere.
Sectarianism was alive and well in the 50s. And I think he fought against that always. And he went to great pains to consult and talk to the Jews and the Catholics and everybody he could. And I think he would like to have had a country where there were no divisions of that sort.
As war ended, there was a second wave of recruits. Labor had gained respect for its wartime stewardship, but many in the services were deeply conservative after years of wartime discipline.
Away from Singapore. Singapore. What's that on your hat? What do you got there on your hat? Oh, pull a minute. Pull a minute, good out with it. Let's have a look at the nine. Yeah.
When the war was over, we had delays in getting our troops back to Australia. Naturally, they were restless. They wanted to come back. Now, when I landed at Cairns with a contingent of soldiers that I'd flown in from Moresby, when we came ashore, I remember as well the reaction of the troops that I had with me when on the side of a wall was painted a big sign, the Cairns branch of the Communist Party of Australia. And it sort of said everything. Perhaps we were oversensitive.
It was very well expressed for me, or our responsibilities were expressed by General Baume, who'd been our Commander-in-Chief until very recently, at an Anzac Day, perhaps the first after the war, when there was a huge crowd at the Melbourne Shrine. I mean, there would be over 100,000 marching men, and more than that of civilians. And he said, "Don't you think, you fellas, that you handed in your duty to this country when you handed in your ammunition and your arms and your uniforms? There are still great threats to the way of life we've been defending by arms. You are the natural leaders of this country, and will be for 30, 40 years, and you come out and oppose this in your unions and your school boards and your shire councils and whatever you happen to take an active interest, your RSL, whatever you take an interest in." Now, when we broke up, none of us thought other than that he was referring to the Communist Party.
In 1946, the Liberals faced their first election.
In giving Australia a major place among the nations of the world, J.B. Chifley, here seen with President Truman, and such men as Dr.
Labour leader Curtin had died, but had been replaced by the popular Ben Chifley. It was the Liberals' worst ever result, only 33% of the vote.
I remember after the 1946 election, a reporter rang my father and said, "Would you like to comment?" And he said, "What can you say when you've been run over by a steamroller?"
It was devastating for the party and for Mr Menzies. And we began to wonder whether it was possible for us to win an election with Mr Menzies as leader. Now, that is always the first thing a Liberal thinks of. It's always the leaders to blame. They never consider that it might be the party itself.
In fact, one of my brothers said to me one day that we can't win with Menzies. And I remember saying to him that you didn't change the captain of a cricket team until you found a better one.
In the end, the Liberals did not have to make their own fortunes. In 1947, Prime Minister Chifley gave Menzies the boost he needed.
A crowd of more than 10,000 listened to speakers of the Bank Officers Association protesting against the Chifley government's plan to nationalise banks.
I think everybody voted Labor in 1943. Maybe I wasn't old enough to vote, I was so stupid. But to vote Labor. By the time I got discharged in 1946, I voted Labor again. Then I went to university, and Chifley decided to nationalise banks. Well, no bugger was going to tell me where I was going to bank. We thought we'd been fighting for the 4 freedoms. And we had this bunch of socialist lunatics in Canberra who thought they're going to control every bit of our life. So there was a jack-up.
Rolling strikes in industry after industry were disrupting production throughout the country as we moved into 1949. Worst hit were the coal fields. This subversive and very active policy of the Communist Party was being intensified, centering in New South Wales. Mines were at a standstill, but at mass meetings on the fields, the insidious red propaganda was at peak production, feeding the thousands of unemployed.
An election was due in 1949. The tide ran against a government beset by rationing, the bank issue and the coal strike. The public had not learned to love Menzies, but they didn't need to.
A big swing against the Labour government has taken place. In the state of Queensland, Labour has so far only won 4 seats against...
I remember that 49 election night very well. I came home from the pictures, as we call them, with Mum and Dad and one of my brothers, and my eldest brother was there, and he excitedly said, "We've won, and the biggest swing's been in Queensland." Dad was particularly happy. because he owned a garage and it was the end of petrol rationing.
It was jubilant. It was great excitement. I imagine very much like 1972 when Whitlam came in with It's Time. It was time and it was exciting and it was wonderful.
In conjunction with their country party allies, the Liberals had won a 27-seat majority.
We represent all the people, not just the ones who voted for us, but the ones who voted against us. And that the real thing that we have to produce in Australia is not only national prosperity, but national unity.
Governing for all Australians raised the question of what to do with the legacy of the just opposed Labor government.
The greatest substantial authority that a Prime Minister has is in the creation of policy.
In fact, many post-war initiatives had already been set in place by Labor. Migration, the Snowy Mountains scheme, soldier resettlement. But there was a change of emphasis.
Now, what is the value of this middle class so defined and described? First, it has a stake in the country. It has responsibility for homes. Homes material, homes human, homes spiritual.
We believed that home ownership was one of the key differences between the Socialists and the Liberal Party at the 49 election. Deadman, in the Chifley government, said more than once, we don't want to build in Australia a whole mass of little capitalists.
If Labor didn't want little capitalists, the Liberals did. Banks were given tax breaks in return for lending to first home buyers. There were new suburbs, new electorates, new middle-class voters.
There were things about that period that provided people with reassurance and hope. And one of the great success stories of that period was the way in which we enthusiastically absorbed so many migrants from Europe. You meet them now in middle and old age talking very enthusiastically and passionately. I struck them the other night at a Greek ball. They talked about how they were received into Australia and they were given a chance. And they love those years because the contrast was so stark from war-devastated Europe.
You see, under a communist government, you're pushed around. And if you don't like it, that's just too bad.
By 1950, the International Cold War was underway.
Today in Australia, Reds openly preach their gospel, flout our laws, and...
In Australia, Communist Party membership had halved since the war, but communists maintained strong influence in trade unions.
There was very little humour on the wharves. Big Jim Healy, boss of the Waterside Workers' Federation, had banned loading of ships to New Zealand. He was sentenced to 6 weeks' jail and fined on 4 charges of interfering with trade across the Tasman.
There was a feeling of almost of crisis in the community because these communists had really set out to take charge and something had to be done about them except words.
Menzies introduced a bill to outlaw the Communist Party. It aimed at a blacklist of Marxist sympathisers to be banned from any government or union job. It raised an important question. How liberal was the Liberal Party?
We had lots of party meetings about whether or not the Communist Party should be outlawed or declared illegal. And it was a very difficult one, because what were you going to do with people who defied the ban? You can't put people in jail for having certain opinions. You can for expressing them, of course. And that wasn't very nice either.
On June 25th at 4 a.m., the North Korean army crossed the 38th parallel into South Korea, and the battle was on. The free nation...
Menzies would defend the bill as a security measure, saying that the government expected the Korean War to escalate into a global anti-Soviet war within 3 years.
The world needs the United States of America. The world needs the British peoples of the world.
The world needs every scrap of democratic strength that can be found in it.
Meanwhile, Labour was hopelessly split by the bill, opposing then supporting it. Liberals could scent the division in Labour ranks.
The Communist Party existence was of great political value to us because, generally speaking, Australians were frightened of them, didn't trust them, and we used their presence and their affiliation with the left wing of the Labour Party to a very great advantage.
Members of the Communist Party from all states protest against the anti-Red Bill, aimed at dissolving the Australian Communist Party. They challenged the Act, and after a 23-day hearing before 7 judges of the High Court, the Anti-Red Act was declared to be constitutionally invalid. It was a victory for the Communist Party and Party Chairman Sharkey, who had just...
Days after the High Court decision, Menzies obtained a double dissolution.
As the first returns are posted in the tally room, radio and newspaper correspondents flash figures throughout Australia. The Liberal Country Party has returned to office with the loss of only a few seats.
Hundreds of thousands lined the streets in capital cities to watch the Jubilee procession. New Australians from all over
The election was the year that the Commonwealth celebrated its Jubilee.
enthusiasm for their new country.
The Liberal-controlled Parliament gathered for a festive ball.
Menzies was in charge of proceedings in King's Hall and Parliament House, where there was a glittering crowd for the celebration of the 50th anniversary of Federation.
And Chifley said, I'm going to be in bed reading a whodunit. He didn't go to the ball.
I was standing outside the entrance to the House of Reps about 9:30 or 10, with all the splendour of this magnificent function on, and Evatt put his head around the corner and said, Fred, I want to see you. Oh, I said, don't worry me now, Doc. I'm about to go and have a dance. No, he said, you've got to come with me. Chifley's dying.
Menzies had to go to the microphone and announce this publicly. I think he began, ladies and gentlemen, it is my melancholy duty to announce to you that the Leader of the Opposition, Mr. Chifley, has just died.
Menzies was quite white. You know, personally, he had liked Chifley, and, well, it was a very sad occasion. It converted what had been quite bright into something desolating.
I was very annoyed. I thought it was a terribly shocking time to die when you were having a middle of a dance for us. It seemed a terrible thing to do. You know, it's the last kick of the Labour Party. But don't forget that was just after I'd been elected, and I had a different view now. But that would be the sort of thing that I thought then, yes.
Chifley was a remarkable man. He had no formal education, as you and I would understand that expression. And yet he had the most acute mind. He got...
My father was really very sad when Chifley died. Things were very different in those days. And there was not the same animosity between people on different sides of the house.
It was a political watershed. The mood in Canberra changed dramatically. Chifley was replaced as Leader of the Opposition by Herbert Vere Evatt.
But politically, from the time he came in, I disliked him and distrusted him. And one's entitled to dislike people.
Each loathed the other. Evatt could perhaps lay claim to intellectual credentials greater than those of Menzies, but Evatt was a poor speaker and debater in Parliament. Menzies was brilliant. Menzies could trounce Evatt in debate. Menzies resented Evatt's intellectual accomplishments, I think, and Evatt resented Menzies' golden speech.
The only thing I can remember my father saying about, talking about Evatt once, was he said, I wish I'd done a doctorate, got a doctorate, and then we could both be doctors.
The first battle between the leaders took place within weeks. Menzies reintroduced the Communist Bill, modified into a referendum. Evatt tirelessly travelled the country, advocating a no vote. But the referendum also caused ructions within the Victorian Liberal Party. Young Liberals campaigned against the measure, led by their Vice President, Alan Missen.
He was, of course, immensely affronted, as I think we all were, by what was going on in America at the time with McCarthyism, which if it hadn't been happening, you couldn't have believed. And the idea that we should follow any such similar pattern, he just thought was totally undemocratic, totally unnecessary and totally absurd.
Alan Missen was a born rebel, and he found it very hard to do the work that he was required to do when he got onto the executive. So much so that in the end I moved for his suspension from the executive. And he was suspended for quite some time.
Alan, throughout his political life, stood for a view of politics and of liberal politics, which in my opinion, and of course I'm biased, but it is my considered opinion, was immensely important to the Liberal Party. It's often referred to as small L liberalism.
I had nothing against Missen personally, but I could see that if he was allowed to go on that way, we'd never get anywhere.
Throughout Alan's career, there were always people who would make remarks like Mr. Anderson, which I think to a degree, I mean, such views were, of course, very sincerely held, but I think all of this is reflecting is two entirely different views of what the party should be like.
Most Liberals supported a yes vote. On the eve of the poll, newspaper magnate Frank Packer personally wrote an advertising banner. But neither Menzies nor Packer had judged the electorate accurately. The referendum narrowly failed its required majority in New South Wales, South Australia and Victoria.
Menzies was bitter about losing the anti-communist referendum. And I remember leaving the Hotel Australia in Sydney and driving with him out to the airport on Sunday morning after the defeat. And I recall him saying to me, "Well, my boy, that's the last referendum I will ever put to the people of Australia."
What was your reaction when you found that you'd lost the referendum, only very narrowly, but that it had been lost?
Well, I did what I always did in my prime ministerial life. I had dinner, I got into bed, and as I told my parson once, I said, "You'll be shocked by this," but when I'd got into bed and had read a book for a while, I used to say to myself, "To hell with them," and put my head on the pillow and go to sleep. Mr. Khrushchev said, among other things,
anti-communism continued as a major theme.
Nations who oppress other nations cannot themselves be free.
It underpinned the Liberal achievement of a post-war defence structure linking Australia with America, New Zealand and Southeast Asia.
Freedom and independence.
And domestically, it was good politics. Before the 1954 election, the Liberals were trailing when a Red Scare broke again.
In the House of Representatives, the Prime Minister announced that Vladimir Petrov, Third Secretary of the Russian Embassy, has approached Australian security men and sought asylum. This had been granted. The news of a spy ring which might involve Australian nationals shocked the nation. Mrs. Petrov, firmly gripped by the two Russians, is partly assisted, partly dragged towards the plane. She is obviously...
I stood under the tail of the plane on the airport.
Mrs. Petrov, up to this point, has not sought asylum in Australia.
And the crowd, some of them were yelling, "Stay, Petrova," and some were yelling, "Go home, Petrova." And they pulled the gangplank away from the plane.
She looks back for one instant as if beseeching help and is then forced further up the gangway.
And as I was there, I looked up and I looked her full in the face and I knew what she was feeling. And I also knew that if she went, the election would have been lost. So I went back and I rang up the lodge At that stage, the Cabinet was having its end-of-session dinner. I think they were all fairly well primed. I subsequently heard that there was a debate at the dinner table. Some people, particularly McEwen, said, do nothing, let her go. Menzies, however, came round to the position that something had to be done. A message was sent to the plane.
Everyone now knows what happened 7 hours later in Darwin. There Mrs. Petrov sought asylum in Australia, and it was granted. The Russian diplomats went on to Russia.
Mrs. Petrov's rescue helped the Liberals to their third election victory. Its aftermath was to decimate Labour. Petrov alleged members of Evatt's staff were Soviet contacts.
He went a bit odd over all that business. Evatt really lost his balance over this matter.
Evatt turned on anti-communists inside his own party. Some were expelled. A mostly Catholic right wing split off to form the Democratic Labour Party, a gift to the Liberals.
There wasn't much point in starting a party which became the DLP. If you then gave it second preferences to the Labour Party, they would flow back. You might as well not have started. So to be effective, you had to give your second preferences to the Liberals in order to ensure that Labour didn't come to power.
Once again, the DLP's second preferences went to the Liberals, and that virtually...
4 out of 5 DLP preferences, former Labour votes, flowed to the Liberals. The Liberal Party went out of its way to support its new electoral allies.
There were occasions where I raised money for them separately. I would go to selected people whom I knew well. I'd explain the situation to them. I would say it was absolutely essential that we had the DLP preferences. If we didn't have them, we couldn't win government or we couldn't retain government. And 9 times out of 10, they would give me an amount, maybe 500, maybe 1,000.
Vote for the lively DLP candidates. And in doing so...
Voting figures suggest that without DLP preferences, the coalition may have lost every election from 1958 to 1975.
Pensioners protest and unemployment figures rise. The politicians are not winning any popularity poll here.
Even with DLP preferences, the Liberals had a scare against Evatt's successor, Caldwell, in 1961.
And the credit squeeze starts.
We were devastated here in Queensland. Menzies held up throughout the rest of Australia. We lost seats galore. On the Saturday night, election night, I was a certain Labor gain. No less an authority than the then Australian Broadcasting Commission had me as down and out, gone and forgotten. I wasn't so sure.
Well, Jim was an ardent anti-communist. There were a number in the Parliament when I first went in, but when the election of 1961 came along and the result dragged on for about 10 days, it all hinged on Jim Killen's seat, and in the end he won by Communist Party preferences, only by 100 or so votes. But for some strange reason, we never heard Jim make another anti-communist speech after that.
Liberals reacted quickly to their near miss. Their main priority was to regain business confidence.
I want the Tariff Board to bear in mind in the first place that it is an advisory authority, it's not a policy-making instrument of government.
Country Party Trade Minister John McEwen was allowed to give special trade protection to manufacturing, a policy which would outlast Menzies and continue right through the 1960s.
One of the serious consequences of Sir Robert Menzies' neglect, if you like, or failure to cultivate big business was that Sir John McEwen and the Country Party had gained enormous influence with big business and were sometimes successful in pressuring the government in directions, particularly with regard to tariffs, which might not necessarily have been in for Australia's good as a whole.
I can remember in Cabinet that there was a tariff board report brought down giving an unanswerable case that a certain industry in a country town should be closed down, woolen industry. It was costing Australian consumers a fortune to keep this alive. The member of Parliament for that area, that happened to be the Deputy Prime Minister, John McEwen, said, "This is not going to go through. This report is not going to be accepted because it will cost me dearly electorally in Wangaratta." And we're talking about the Wangaratta woolen mills and Bruck mills. And he won without a fight. That's political realism, I suppose, but very bad government.
Any city like Sydney is a hub of commerce as well as a congregation of homes.
In response to business pressure, Menzies also set up a committee to investigate the economy.
Any big store is a clearinghouse for the varied wonders of every land. Italian textiles, Eastern silks and Australian wool.
The Vernon Committee sat for 2 years and produced the most comprehensive economic analysis of Australia since Federation.
Mere husbands may grumble at fashion, but Milady's whims mean jobs for designers, tanners and salespeople.
Menzies dumped it as too restrictive on policy making.
His main objection to the Vernon report were proposals relating to target rates of growth, target migration numbers, to the establishment of an advisory body which would look at the medium and long-term aspects of economic policy. I think politicians live from one election to another, and getting hooked into policies which are too long-term, certainly on the economic side, makes life difficult for them. And Menzies was not given to long-term views on economic matters.
Whatever his economic record, Robert Menzies continued to dominate political combat.
I talk about the Air Force, and I talk about it with very great pleasure because there's some fellow who says you haven't got one, you see? Now, what is the position? What is the position? My dear boy, you're not off the drawing board yourself. Not even a prototype yet, this chap.
I used to go on campaigns with my father all the time. We always had the feeling that he was a little tense until the first person yelled out, "Give us your policy, pig iron." And then he relaxed and he got into the swing of it and he could answer the interjectors, and it was a lot of fun.
The early election Menzies called in 1963 was a triumph. A 1-seat margin converted into a 22-seat landslide. Menzies entered his last period in office unchallenged.
Menzies was the party. He towered over it. He had very high standards and requirements. He didn't tell you when you weren't meeting them, or if you weren't meeting them, but you became aware of it. As I've said before, he was an aloof man. I don't think myself that people who achieve great political office are very easy to work for ever.
Menzies taught me a great deal. He was an exemplary parliamentary performer, but I also liked observing the way his mind was going to work. If he was going to make an important speech, I'd try and work out in my own mind, what's he going to be saying, what lines are he going to take, and I suppose I'd give myself marks whether I got quite close or not.
I've got Menzies, in my estimation, in a pretty hallowed place, because I liked the man. I lost my father the year I got into Parliament, and Menzies became the father figure, and used to treat me as a son, strangely enough. So I've got that sort of respect. But I think history will judge the Menzies era in politics very harshly, because I think what the opportunities that Menzies had and the Liberal Party had in those days could read much, much better if he had have taken a few risks.
We have established most normal relations with Japan. We have...
Throughout his term, there had been initiatives which bore Menzies' stamp.
There are some who will never be able to blot it out of their memory, but as a nation, we should blot out of our minds and hearts hostilities of the past.
A trade treaty with Japan in 1957 would make Japan our largest trading partner and lay the basis of the economic future. He'd set in place the creation of 8 new Australian universities. He'd dedicated himself to the development of the national capital.
Some commentators claim that the Prime Minister has made a hobby of the development of Canberra.
And the health and the future of these sturdy young Australians is one of the greatest concerns of the men who govern the nation today.
The criticism that he didn't do enough for the future is, of course, the recollection with hindsight.
As the young country grows, theirs is the task ahead.
He, after all, delivered prosperity. He did create a situation when I left school with the leaving certificate in 1956. There were 2% unemployed and the interest rate was 5% and I had no trouble getting a job.
Sir Robert Menzies paid tribute to the work of the nuns and stressed the importance of Christian education.
By the 1960s, some of the tribalism of Australian politics began to break down. The DLP was demanding a return for those crucial preferences.
Equipment can be found.
Liberals finally agreed to give state aid to private, mostly Catholic schools.
Come on, count with me. 1, 2.
The party born of Protestant Australia eased the financial burden on many Catholic families.
Ursuline nuns, Sisters of St. Joseph and Sisters of Mercy study the teachers' method.
However, on most issues, the party and Menzies were as bound to old loyalties as ever.
There are clever people in the world, at least so I understand, who have discovered that all sorts of things ought to be done to the monarchy, to democratise the monarchy, to do something to it, to do something to what we all are proud to say is the most democratic monarchy in the whole wide world.
After Winston Churchill's death in 1965, the Prime Minister accepted the honorary British title of Lord Warden of the Cinque Ports.
This is a purely local matter of great historic interest and continuity, and it happens now for the first time to go to a man outside Great Britain.
They are a reminder of the ancient liberties and privileges, and Sir Robert is a very popular choice in Dover.
We all trooped down to Menzies' office. He was very keen to tell us about the whole detail of the history of the Cinque Ports, and we even got round to discussing whether he'd have a uniform made, and yes, he would have a uniform made, he said, and would he live there? Well, he might get an apartment set up there, and perhaps he would go over there from time to time. And at the time, there was a national maritime strike. All the waterfront was closed down, and as the press conference was coming to an end, Ian Fitchett, one of the great characters of the gallery, finally said, "Well, sir," he said, we've heard about your ports. Now, can you tell us about our ports?" To which Menzies said, "Go and see the Minister for Shipping."
Robert Menzies retired in 1966, the nation's longest-serving Prime Minister.
One becomes tired, one becomes not quite 100%. And I have an old-fashioned belief that the Prime Minister of this country ought to be 100% efficient at all times. It's not an ordinary decision. This is something that doesn't happen very frequently, for a man to go out of office under his own steam. I've gone out of office before today under somebody else's steam, but this time under my own.
The Liberals could look back upon 17 years of stable government. In all that time, not a whisper of corruption.
People ought to remember today, Menzies left the Parliament of Australia after many, many years of great endeavour and great success a poor man, having gone into Parliament rather a wealthy man. He made considerable sacrifices of capital and income to be in the Parliament.
My father was really very stingy with public money. I can remember some friends coming to stay in Canberra when my parents were there. So my mother took her car out of the garage so they could use it. And Lee said to my father, "Bob, really, I do think it's time you had another garage at the lodge." And he said, "Lee, I'm the last of the amateurs." And I think he probably was.
On his retirement, the Sydney Morning Herald said,
"He has never fallen below the highest standards expected of a Prime Minister."
But it also said,
"It was not an era of political or intellectual excitement. Ideas were not welcomed. Debate was not encouraged. Intellectuals were frowned upon or snubbed. It is time for a change."
He was an old man then, and just in the way of things, he didn't see people in the Liberal Party very much. There were people who really were friends who went to see him. I can remember Alick Downer saying we should all go and sit at the feet of Gamaliel and receive his wisdom and ask his advice. Well, they didn't do that.
Robert Gordon Menzies withdrew from public life and soon after had a stroke, making it difficult for him to go out. He was occasionally seen indulging his passion for the Carlton Football Club. One of his few confidants was not a Liberal at all, but fellow Carlton supporter Bob Santamaria.
Every 3 weeks or so, when you would call around to the Menzies home on Haverbrack Avenue, it would be about 5 o'clock in the afternoon. At about 5:45, you'd have a drink together. And one day, right out of the blue, he said to me, he said, "Well, young Bob," and I was nearly 60 years of age, "tell me the 3 biggest mistakes I ever made." But of course I had never thought of any mistakes that he'd made, and I certainly didn't want to begin then in his own home. I said that I had never given any thought to the question. He said, "Well, nevertheless, think now." And I said, "Look, I can't extemporise." "No," he said, "I want you to think." So I said, "Well, at your insistence," because it was rude, I said, "the first mistake, I think, is that you really are responsible for consolidating Canberra as the national capital. And you've created in Australia an oligarchy that we can never get at. Doesn't matter what they do to the country, we can't do anything to them." He nodded his head. Then I said, "You accepted the Martin report and helped to create altogether, I think that there were 17 universities in Australia. And I said, it should have been obvious that there weren't enough good academics in Australia to run 7, let alone 17. And this was at the period, of course, of all the Vietnam troubles. And he nodded his head. And then he said, "And what's the third mistake?" And I said, "Well, you created the Liberal Party." And he said, "But they're the only 3 things I ever did."
My father said to me, "When I retire, all the clever people will say, nothing ever happened in Menzies' time. He was no good, forget about him." But he said, "Don't fret about it too much, because eventually it should come right."
All right, that should be enough. You've got enough.
Can we get something to show victory?
I don't like...
We're not going to repeat the policies of Menzies because we live in a different era. But a lot of his style, a lot of his attitudes are timeless.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Well, on Saturday we're all going to vote.
Well, I don't know about taking advice from any particular individual in that way, but...
After Saturday, you will have either one government or another. You will have the Menzies government that you've become perhaps a little accustomed to.
All of us in the Liberal Party have been through difficult times recently. Today, we have put all of that behind us.
You know us, you know me, for better or for worse. You know our policies in practice, and you know
There's
the
no
result.
point in reflecting on that. We'll leave the past to historians. Peter and I, we're interested in the future. We're not historians.
What to do. Anyhow, whatever you do will be right. I hope it will keep your present government at the head of your administration in this wonderful country of Australia. Thank you and good night, ladies and gentlemen, and good luck to all of you.